I didn't expect a Tuesday to be anything more than numbered time, a square on a calendar you pass your finger over without thinking. 3 months after Harold's funeral, the days had been exactly like that, quiet, routine, the house ticking in the afternoons the way it always had. His shirts still on the lower rail because I couldn't yet move them. At 9 a.m. sharp, the attorney's office called. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're ready to proceed with the estate settlement. 2 o'clock. The voice was courteous enough to be cold. I said yes, because for weeks I'd been saying yes to forms, to signatures, to a future that felt like a hallway I wasn't sure I wanted to walk down. I chose the navy dress Harold loved, the one he'd teased made my eyes look dangerous. I fastened the pearl necklace he'd given me on our wedding day, a habit lately more like a prayer. In the mirror, I met a woman I half recognized. 64, silver threaded through auburn, grief's small etchings deepening what time had already sketched. I lifted my chin anyway. Harold would have. "We're still here," I told the reflection. "We do the next right thing." Traffic was thicker than usual on the drive downtown, brake lights blooming like impatient roses. I drummed the steering wheel and forced my breathing slow. In for 4, out for 6. If I let my mind wander, it found Harold in that last month, his hand cooler, sleep heavier, the way he clung to my voice when pain shadowed his eyes. He'd trusted me with passwords and property tax folders, with grocery lists and the place where we kept spare keys. We talked through the will years ago, not romantic but real, the scaffolding of a shared life. "Everything to me," he'd said. "After I'm gone, you'll know what to do. Provisions for Michael later." It had been simple because we were. Trust is simple when you've practiced it for 42 years. The parking garage under Morrison & Associates building was a concrete throat-swallowing sound. I cut the engine and the radio died mid-song. The air smelled of rubber, cold metal, the sweetish tang of gasoline. I gathered my purse and the folder of documents, checked that I'd remembered the notarized letters and the last bank statement, and stepped out. My heel clicked, the echo traveling farther than it should have. That's when I heard a voice. "Ma'am, wait. Please." It's extraordinary how fast fear can move through a body. I turned. A man stepped out from behind a pillar, hands open, staying back a few paces as if approaching a stray cat. He looked 50-something, clothes worn but clean, boots scuffed to a soft dullness, hair uncombed, a weathered face that said too many nights without a door to lock. "I don't want anything from you," he said quickly. "You're Mrs. Whitmore, right? Harold's widow?" My heart jerked, then steadied. "How do you know that?" "I used to work upstairs," he said. "Morrison & Associates, paralegal, 12 years. He tried a smile that didn't land. "They let me go 3 weeks ago." "Why are you stopping me?" "Because they're going to ask you to sign things today you can't unsign." His gaze flicked toward the elevator bank, then back to me. "Your daughter-in-law has been working with them. Documents showing you're not competent. Statements, medical notes, photographs. They're setting up a trust with your son as trustee. You'd be provided for. That's the language they use." Anger came first, hot, clean, clarifying, and then doubt, because doubt is polite and trained into women of my generation. "That's absurd," I said, but I heard my mother's voice in mine, a tell that I was buying time. He nodded, as if he'd expected both words and tone. "They'll say Harold amended his will in his final weeks. They'll use phrases like concern for her welfare, best practices, standard procedure. And they'll record the meeting. There'll be a little red light, and they'll pretend you gave consent by walking in." "How do you know any of that?" I asked. "And why tell me?" "Because I liked your husband. He was decent to everyone in that office, even the ones the partners didn't see." He swallowed. "And because what they're doing is wrong. People think desperation makes you a criminal. It doesn't. Choices do." I looked at him longer. The jacket had a frayed cuff. His messenger bag was the kind you buy once and keep forever. His eyes held steady on mine, not pleading, not feral, concerned, tired. "What's your name?" I asked. Eddie Kowalski." "Mr. Kowalski," I said, and heard the formal edge in my voice, the armor I use when I'm deciding whom to believe. "You say they have medical records." "Fabricated. They pulled templates, copied letterheads, got a tech to clone signatures, they paid for statements. Your daughter-in-law Maisie brought photos. Mundane things twisted into incidents. You chatting with a cashier becomes confused about payment. You asking a neighbor's kid to repeat a name becomes forgetful of familiar faces. I grip the folder against my ribs until the corners bit. Memory is such a delicate thing. If someone suggests you misremember, they don't have to prove you don't remember. They only have to stand next to your doubt. Eddie's voice lowered. They'll try to move fast and drown you in pages. If you hesitate, they'll reassure you. If you ask a question, they'll treat it like naivete. If you resist, they'll suggest rescheduling, which only gives them time to tighten the screws. He glanced around again, nerves sparking through his shoulders. I know this is a lot to take from a stranger, but I've got pieces, originals. If I can get them into the right hands. How do I know you're not part of a different scam? I said. If Harold were here, he'd be narrowing his eyes at me in solidarity. You don't, he said, and his honesty pulled a tiny pin in me that made something unclench. But I can tell you details the receptionist upstairs won't expect you to know. Conference room A has a recorder hidden near the ficus by the window. Morrison favors his left. When he lies, he'll angle that shoulder toward the door. There's a junior associate who will avoid your eyes and read a prepared script about trust structures. She'll say, "It's standard." She'll say it twice. Cold air swirled in the garage and curled under my hem. The elevator chimed somewhere above us. I could have gone back to the car, driven home, crawled into Harold's sweater, told myself I was being dramatic. Or I could step into the elevator and face whatever was waiting, pearls like a small weight at my throat reminding me who I was when I wasn't afraid. What would you have me do? I asked him. Don't sign anything, he said. Ask for every page to be explained. Ask for originals. Take pictures. If they say no, say you're not comfortable. Trust the part of you that already knows the answers. He hesitated, then added softly, She told them you probably wouldn't remember the appointment. Something clean and sharp rose up in me. Did she? I'm sorry, he said. I'll be on the 15th, in the hall. If they throw me out, I'll wait near security. I'll find you. I pressed the call button. The chrome doors slid open on a breath of refrigerated air, the kind that smells faintly of lemon and money. Eddie stepped aside. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes? You're not crazy, he said simply. And your husband didn't change his mind about you. The doors closed on his face, lined, earnest. The kind of face you'd trust to watch your groceries while you dash back for the milk you forgot. The car rose, numbers blinking red. I watched my reflection in the brushed metal panel and placed my hand flat over those pearls. I remembered the last time Harold had fastened them, his fingertips careful, his breath in my hair. You always know what to do, he'd said. It had felt like romance then. Now it felt like a directive. The 15th floor opened onto plush silence. A lobby soaked in soft light, expensive art hung just crooked enough to suggest taste rather than money. My heels clicked on polished stone, each step a small declaration. The receptionist smiled with the warmth of a winter sun, all light, no heat. Mrs. Whitmore, they're ready for you. Conference room A. The hallway felt longer than it was. Most doors were closed. Sound came through in muffled sips, voices, a printer, a laugh cut off too quickly. Outside conference room A, I stopped. Through the frosted glass, silhouettes at a table, and one I recognized by posture and hair. For a moment, I let myself grieve the 8 years in which I'd wanted that silhouette to be real family. Then, I laid my palm on the brass handle. My hand was steady. Whatever script they'd prepared for me, I didn't intend to read my lines. The conference room was a theater dressed in mahogany and glass, designed to make you feel small before you even took a seat. 3 men in dark suits were arranged with the precision of chess pieces on one side of the table. On the other, Maisie sat waiting. For a flicker of a second, just long enough for me to catch it, her eyes widened when I entered. Surprise, maybe even fear. Then her mask slipped back into place. The practiced smile of a dutiful daughter-in-law, honeyed and hollow. Oh, Mildred, I didn't think you were coming today, she cooed, as if my presence were an inconvenience, not a right. Eddie's warning rang in my ears. I walked to the empty chair, my pearls steadying me like armor. Of course I'm here. This is about my husband's estate. The lead attorney, Mr. Morrison, gestured at the stack of documents. Mrs. Whitmore, these require your signature. Routine, nothing complicated. His voice was the kind that belonged to boardrooms, not kitchens, smooth as lacquer overwrought. Before touching the papers, I placed my purse squarely on the table, the sound louder than it needed to be. I'd like to understand what we're discussing first. Harold and I reviewed his will countless times. I know his wishes. A glance flickered between the attorneys quick, like a card passed under the table. There were some amendments, Morrison said. His tone dipped on the word. In his final weeks, he expressed concerns about your capacity to manage financial matters. For your protection, of course. My throat tightened. Protection. The word had teeth hidden in velvet. Maisie leaned forward, her voice soft, almost pitying. Mildred, you've seemed so tired lately. Forgetful. Dad just wanted to make sure you were cared for. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her hands twisted her wedding ring, a nervous tick betraying her calm facade. I reached for the folder they slid toward me. Inside, medical notes, statements, even photographs. My breath caught. One page claimed I'd accused Michael of stealing when he helped with receipts. Another described me as agitated and confused after grocery shopping. The handwriting was unmistakable, Maisie's loops and flourishes. My hands shook, but my voice stayed firm. This is false. Every word. Mildred, you don't remember, she insisted, her tone painted with false concern. We were all worried. I stared at her, this woman who had kissed my cheek at Christmas dinners, who had tucked herself into our family photos like she belonged. She looked back with eyes polished to shine but empty of truth. Then I noticed it. A small red light blinking steadily near the ficus in the corner. Recording. Eddie had told me. Are you recording this meeting? I asked. It's standard practice, one lawyer said quickly. Too quickly. Before I could press further, a knock rattled the door. The secretary peeked in, her face nervous. Mr. Morrison, someone insists on seeing you. Says his name is Eddie Kowalski. Claims it's urgent. The name dropped like a stone in water. I saw the blood drain from Maisie's face, her composure cracking. Morrison snapped. Tell him we're in session. Actually, I said, standing. I'd like to hear what he has to say. The door opened, and Eddie walked in. He looked more composed than he had in the garage, though still out of place among the polished wood and tailored suits. His messenger bag hung heavy at his side. Mrs. Whitmore, he said with respectful gravity, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. Morrison stood abruptly, his chair scraping. You're trespassing. I'll call security. Call them, Eddie replied calmly. He set his bag on the table and pulled out a manila folder. But first, Mildred should know these are copies of your husband's original will and the authentic medical records. Before they were altered. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the HVAC. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Eddie slid the documents toward me. Harold's signature, his real signature, stared up from the page, like a familiar voice finally cutting through static. Maisie swayed, her voice a thin thread. I don't feel well. She collapsed back into her chair, mascara already bleeding down her cheek. I looked around the table, at the men who had traded in forged paper, at the woman I had welcomed as family, and at Eddie, who had risked what little he had left to bring me truth. You're going to want to hear this, I told Maisie, my voice harder than it had been in years. The meeting had stopped being about signatures. It was now about survival, theirs or mine, and I had no intention of being the one undone. Detective Sarah Chen arrived within 20 minutes, though the wait stretched like a drawn-out breath. The conference room, once a polished showpiece, now felt like a stage stripped bare under harsh lights. Maisie sat pale and silent, her composure scattered like broken glass. The attorneys muttered amongst themselves, trying to look neutral but sweating under their collars. Eddie stayed near me, standing a little straighter now that he was no longer only a voice in the shadows. Detective Chen was about my age, with eyes that seemed kind until they pinned you, then they were surgical. She took her time, asking for documents, handling them as if each sheet were an X-ray of intent. When she looked at me, she spoke gently. Mrs. Whitmore, I'll need to understand your history with your daughter-in-law, from the beginning. I thought back to the first dinner. 8 years ago, Michael had brought Maisie through the front door, her smile bright, her handshake firm, her compliments effortless. She had seemed perfect, attentive, agreeable, almost too polished. Back then, I had been grateful my son had found someone so sweet. Now, recounting those memories, I felt each moment rearranging itself like puzzle pieces I had once forced to fit. Her easy laughter, her way of siding with Harold and me on every opinion, it wasn't harmony. It was camouflage. Over time, the small comments began. A light laugh when I misplaced my glasses, a concerned look if I repeated a story. Nothing that could be called cruel, just planting. Seeds so subtle you didn't notice until the roots choked the ground. Eddie pulled out his worn notebook, pages creased with use. I started noticing around 6 months ago, he explained. Maisie began coming to the firm more often, sometimes with documents, sometimes just with questions. Morrison told us she was preparing for estate matters, but the tone changed. Meetings behind closed doors, whispered instructions. He flipped to a page scrawled with dates. She brought photos, statements, each one twisting normal life into proof of decline. He passed one to Detective Chen, a grocery store snapshot me smiling at a cashier while my bags were being packed. The caption claimed I'd been confused, unable to pay, requiring intervention. I clenched my fists. She followed me, took pictures, and turned kindness into incompetence. Maisie finally lifted her head, her voice a whisper. I needed documentation. The lawyers said they required evidence. Evidence of what? I asked, my words cold. Of me buying groceries? Chen took notes, her pen scratching steadily. Then she asked Maisie directly, were you experiencing financial hardship? Maisie's lips trembled. We owe over $300,000. Mortgages, credit cards, business loans. Michael's consulting company is failing. We were drowning. The number hit me like ice water. 300,000. My son, my Harold's son, drowning silently while pretending all was fine. The house in Maple Ridge, the vacations, the dinners out they had been, illusions built on debt. So instead of asking for help, I said slowly, you decided to steal. Maisie's tears came then, mascara streaking, her voice breaking. We just wanted to survive. The trust would have taken care of you. You wouldn't have wanted for anything. Eddie shook his head, his voice low but steady. I saw the calculations. She and the firm planned to allocate $40,000 a year for Mildred's living expenses. The rest would cover their debts. Within 5 years, the estate would be gone. My chest tightened. Harold had worked 4 decades, saved, invested carefully, all for my security. And they would have reduced me to an allowance, a ward in my own life, while his legacy vanished into unpaid bills. Detective Chen turned to me. Mrs. Whitmore, this is textbook financial exploitation. We'll pursue charges. But I need to know more about your son's role. I closed my eyes briefly. Michael, my boy who once brought me dandelions clenched in his fist, who called me when he scraped his knee, who grew into a man I thought I could trust. Had he been complicit, or had he been as manipulated as I? The room blurred, but I forced myself to answer. He's proud, too proud. He would never ask for help. I suspect Maisie fed him stories, made him believe Harold and I doubted each other. I don't know how deep it runs. Detective Chen's expression softened. We'll get clarity. For now, Mrs. Whitmore, you've done the hardest part, choosing to see the truth. I looked across at Maisie, who sat shrinking into her chair, her carefully constructed persona dissolving. For years she had called me Mom, hugged me in kitchens, joined my prayers over meals. Now she was just a stranger, revealed by the cold light of desperation. And yet beneath the fury, I felt another weight. The betrayal not just of a daughter-in-law, but of a system that should have protected us. Lawyers paid to distort, debt sold as justification, motherhood twisted into vulnerability. I touched the pearls at my throat, Harold's gift, and swore silently. They would not erase me. They would not overwrite his trust in me. The question now was whether Michael, my only son, had already been rewritten by the same lies. 3 days later, my doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw Michael, hair disheveled, face drawn, and beside him, Maisie, looking far smaller than the woman who once strutted through holiday dinners as if she owned the table. I opened the door but didn't step back. Mom, Michael said, his voice cracking. Please, we need to talk. I let them in, not out of softness, but because I needed to hear the truth directly. They sat on the old couch Harold and I had chosen years ago, the same couch where Maisie had first joined our family circle. That memory felt like a ghost in the room, watching. Michael spoke quickly, almost pleading. Detective Chen told me everything: the forged documents, the fake medical reports, the lies about Dad changing his will. Mom, I swear, I didn't know. I never agreed to that. I stood across the room, arms folded. But you knew about the debts. His face collapsed. Yes, we're drowning. The business, the mortgages, the credit cards. I was ashamed. I thought I could fix it before you found out. And when Dad got sick, He trailed off, unable to finish. Maisie broke the silence, her voice hoarse. We thought the inheritance could save us. I felt fury boil under my ribs. Save you by destroying me. Michael flinched. Not like that. Exactly like that, I snapped. Do you have any idea what a conservatorship means? It's not just helping with bills, it's stripping me of rights. You were planning to turn me into a child in my own home. He blinked, shocked. I thought it was just to help manage things. Maisie turned to him, sharp, her mask finally slipping. Stop pretending, Michael. We talked about it, about declaring her unfit. The air seemed to collapse between us. My son stared at his wife, as though seeing her for the first time, horror dawning. I thought I was protecting you, he whispered to me. She said Dad was worried. She said you were forgetting things, little things. Little things? I repeated. Like canceling dinner last Christmas when Maisie was sick? Or knowing our neighbor's dog is named Butterscotch? Or putting milk in the pantry one time after gardening? Those were her lies, Michael, not my life. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. God, Mom. I believed her. I looked at Maisie, who now sat rigid, her eyes glassy but defiant. How long have you been planning this? Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. When the debts got worse, when we realized how much Harold's estate was worth, you don't need all that money, Mildred. You live simply. We needed it more than you. It was the first truly honest thing she had said to me, and it was vile. Michael's anguish broke through in a shout. You were going to steal from my mother. Maisie snapped back, her own pain twisting into rage. I was trying to save us. While you buried your head in the sand, I found a way out. Their marriage cracked open in front of me, but I stayed standing, unflinching. The house around us seemed to hold its breath. Enough, I said finally. My voice didn't shake. This isn't about your excuses, it's about choices. You chose lies. You chose to put me in the crosshairs of your desperation. The room went silent. Michael sat shattered, Maisie rigid, and me still standing, Harold's pearls cool at my throat. I knew then, the family I thought I had no longer existed. What remained would depend on what they chose next. The silence in my living room stretched so long I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the tick of the clock Harold had repaired a dozen times over the years. Michael sat hunched forward, his face in his hands, the weight of shame pulling at his shoulders. Maisie stared at the carpet, her eyes red, but her jaw set tight, still not ready to let go of the lies that had carried her this far. Finally, Michael lifted his head. His eyes were swollen, raw. What do you want us to do, Mom? I had been asking myself that very question for 3 sleepless nights. Did I want revenge, justice, or something harder, something that might rebuild trust where it had been shattered? I stood there, arms folded, pearls cool against my throat, and realized that what I wanted was the truth. Not excuses, not half confessions. The truth laid bare, no matter how ugly. You're going to cooperate with the police, I said. My voice was low but steady. Maisie, you're going to testify against Morrison and his firm. You'll tell the district attorney everything you did, every document you forged, every meeting you attended, every lie you told. If you do that, they may consider a plea agreement. If you don't, you'll face every charge they can throw at you. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Maisie flinched, but she didn't argue. She knew I wasn't bluffing. And Michael, I continued, turning to my son, you have a choice to make. Do you want to be the man your father raised, or the man who let his wife convince him his own mother was incompetent? His face crumpled. Mom, I love her. I nodded. Love isn't enough. Trust is the foundation of a marriage. And she didn't just betray me, she betrayed you. She used your love for me against both of us. Maisie finally spoke, her voice ragged. "I can change. I can be better. Please, Mildred, don't give up on me." I looked at her long and hard. This wasn't a mistake made in desperation. This was months of planning, of photographing me, lying about me, convincing my son that his mother was losing her mind. This was who you chose to be. Her tears spilled freely then, but I felt no satisfaction in watching them fall. The quiet of the room pressed down on us again, thick with everything unsaid. Outside, the laughter of children drifted from the street life, continuing as if nothing inside these walls had broken. Finally, I spoke, the words as heavy as they were necessary. "You both need to choose. Who are you going to be from this moment on? People who accept the consequences of their actions, or people who keep making excuses?" Michael bowed his head, whispering, "I'll tell the truth. All of it." Maisie stayed silent, her body rigid. I understood then. Whatever came next, the choices would be theirs, but mine had already been made. I would no longer be the quiet, trusting woman they thought they could manipulate. I had found my voice again, and I would use it. The room felt heavy with the words I had spoken, but the weight was necessary. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't trembling. I was steady. Michael sat back, his face streaked with tears he didn't bother to wipe. "I'll tell Detective Chen everything," he said, voice rough with exhaustion. "I'll testify against Morrison, against the firm, whatever it takes. But Mom..." He looked at me with the eyes of the little boy who once clung to my hand on his first day of school. "Is there any way you can forgive me?" I inhaled slowly, choosing my words with care. "Forgiveness isn't magic, Michael. It's work. It's truth, every single day. If you mean it, I'll see it in what you do, not in what you say." His chin dipped in a nod. He understood. Maisie's voice cracked the silence. "And me?" Her eyes were rimmed red, but behind them still lingered that stubborn spark, that belief she had been justified. "If I tell the truth, if I cooperate, will you forgive me?" I stared at her, remembering 8 years of family photos, birthday candles, the way she had called me Mom with such ease. Then I remembered her handwriting on false statements, her whispering seeds of doubt into my son's ear, her planning to strip me of my own life. "You don't ask for forgiveness, Maisie," I said softly. "You earn it, and even then, it may never come. What you did wasn't a single lapse. It was months of betrayal, years of pretending." Her tears spilled, but I felt no release in them, only the ache of wasted trust. I turned toward the window, the garden Harold and I had planted, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. "Your father worked 42 years to make sure I'd be safe when he was gone. You tried to erase that with a pen stroke. You tried to erase me. That's something you'll live with, whether or not I ever forgive you." The silence thickened again, but this time, it belonged to them. I had said what needed saying. The rest was theirs to carry. Outside, a breeze stirred the maple leaves, rattling them against the glass. It sounded like Harold's voice reminding me that storms pass, and the strong stay standing. I placed my hand over the pearls at my throat and whispered inwardly, "I am still standing." 6 months passed before I let myself exhale. Seasons had shifted, grief had softened at the edges, and the storm that Maisie set in motion had played itself out in courts and offices instead of inside my home. Maisie took a plea deal, 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service at the local food bank, restitution of every cent she had funneled into Morrison's hands. The lawyers didn't fare as well. Morrison received 4 years in prison, his associates 2 each. Eddie's testimony, detailed and relentless, made sure justice wasn't just symbolic. Michael moved out 3 weeks after that confrontation in my living room. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment downtown, traded his leased BMW for a 10-year-old Honda, and worked 16-hour days rebuilding his business. "The first time we sat for coffee after the dust settled," he admitted, "I keep second-guessing every decision I made in the last 2 years. Was it me, or was it her voice in my head?" I understood. I'd been doing the same, sifting through memories, untangling truth from the web Maisie had woven. Eddie became more than the man who saved me. I offered him the small apartment above Harold's workshop and hired him part-time to tend the garden. Watching him replant soil where weeds had grown felt symbolic. He was proof that losing everything didn't mean losing yourself. As for me, I discovered that life after betrayal could still be full. I began tutoring adults in reading at the library, joined Detective Chen's initiative to help seniors spot financial exploitation, and spent Saturdays volunteering at the same food bank where Maisie now worked her hours. I didn't go there to punish her. I went because the people there needed kindness, and because I refused to let her steal the part of me that gave freely. Michael eventually showed me his new office, a modest storefront with Whitmore Consulting painted on the glass. Pride swelled in me, not just because Harold would have been proud, but because my son was learning integrity the hard way. For the first time in years, he told me, I feel like I'm living my own life. And forgiveness? For Michael, yes. Every day, piece by piece. For Maisie, I let go of the anger because I would not carry her choices like chains. But forgiveness requires trust, and she would never have that again. One October morning, I sat on the back porch, the maple leaves Harold planted for Michael's 10th birthday blazing red. Eddie brought me coffee, Michael texted to meet later, and I felt something I hadn't known in months. Peace. Not the fragile kind that breaks at the first shadow, but the steady kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Harold's love still lived in this house, in the garden, in Michael's resilience, in every breath I chose to take in truth rather than lies. Maisie's scheme had failed not because she was caught, but because the foundation Harold and I built was stronger than deceit. I was 64, and I was just beginning the best chapter of my life. Now I wonder, to those listening, if your own family betrayed you, would you choose revenge, or would you choose to reclaim your peace?